Well, good evening. We're grateful that you're here tonight, and we want to welcome you. This is the first of a series of conversations that we'll have this fall, and my guest tonight is Erin Davis, and I'm guessing that a lot of you may recognize her face and her name. I asked Erin at the beginning of the pandemic, when we first went into quarantine, to come and to share some spiritual practices with us and some ways that we can kind of cope and help think about our spiritual health and physical health too, as we went into this unknown season that we started back in March. And as I was thinking about the fall semester, I wanted to just to kind of revisit some of the things that Erin and I had talked about before, but also just some new things as we now enter into our 6th month living with COVID-19 and the disruption that that's brought to all of our lives. And so I want, for those of you who may not know Erin or may not have had the chance to listen to the conversation we had back in probably in March or April, whenever that was, Erin, I want to give people a chance to get to know you. So if you would just kind of tell people a little bit about yourself, your family, and the work that you do, and then we'll talk more a little bit about our topic.
Okay. Yeah, so my my family and my husband Jason and I have 2 kids, Molly and Nelson. They are 5 and 3 now, and we live outside of Kaufman. And we've been here, I think, a little over 2 years now. So starting to really get settled in here. And I am a licensed marriage and family therapist associate, and I work in the nearby area doing private practice. I work primarily with couples and individuals, adult individuals, but I also work with some teens as well. So I enjoy my work, but I also enjoy getting to have these kind of conversations too.
Yeah, cool. Well, I appreciate you being willing to do this. I'll start with a question that we didn't necessarily talk about discussing, but I'm just kind of curious what did you think we would be here when you and I talked back in March? I'm going to say it's March because I think it was probably
it was a while. Yeah.
So, I mean, how are you processing kind of this last 6 months or so? Is this what you expected, or has it been much different than
that's a good question. I would say, I think I didn't know what to expect. And this may resonate with some people, but because of the season of life I am in, I think I didn't really process what it would be like. I think I just, am like a lot of people, and I go from day to day and kind of survive each day. And so I didn't really think through, okay, I wonder how long it's going to be, but I definitely had hopes that we would be back to normal. So I would say this did not reach my hopes that we're not completely back to normal yet. But I have found some, kind of renewed energy in that some things are getting back to a little bit of what they were before, slowly. Yeah. So, but I definitely didn't think we would be exactly where we're at right now.
Yeah, that's good. And I think I've said to several people, and I know that you relate to this too. I mean, whether your kids are younger or teenagers, if you have gone through this season with kids at home, there's been no playbook for how to navigate a pandemic with kids and all the things that they're very social and creatures anyway. And and I think it's hard for everybody, but I think part of what I wanted us to talk about today is, if life was hard already, we'll just start with that as an assumption. It got harder, right? Everybody who was dealing with any kind of thing, whether it was a family thing, a personal issue, a work-related, thing, a health challenge, whatever it might have been. My experience has been that all of those things, none of that went away. It just kind of got harder because now there was another layer that kind of got added on top of that, right? So one of the things I want to think through together and get you to kind of speak to a little bit is, now that we're entering into our 6th month of this, and there seems to be no immediate end in sight, though, as you said, there's certainly some things that are, slowly kind of coming back to normal. My experience has been, and I'd like to get you to share about yours too, but I feel like that a lot of people that I talk to are weary for different reasons. I mean, the weariness kind of comes from different places, but
Mhm.
weariness, because of the fact that there's no end in sight, or because there's additional safety protocols that we're still having to follow, or, whatever
Mhm.
it may be. Is that kind of what you're finding too?
Yes, I think weariness is a good word for what I am seeing. And I think also another word that I would put there is I think there's a lot of like grieving happening, that I'm seeing grief of loss of jobs, loss of that security in our normal routine, and even the security in new seasons bring, new routines. And here we are, coming into fall, and all the normal things that we can like get excited about fall are not quite the same. And so there's a grief in that.
That's good.
And then also some people actually grieving, real losses because of COVID.
Hmm.
So I think with that grief always comes a weariness.
Yeah, that's a really good addition, because I think, you know, I- I think that describes too just what we were talking about. Like anything that was normal, that was harder, and then to think about the losses that people have experienced, I think has really
Hmm.
compounded that in a lot of ways. And so I guess maybe let's kind of, part of what I wanted to do with our time today is to provide people a way to think about the long haul, and
Hmm.
care, and the importance of caring for ourselves in this season, while we continue to try to live faithfully as God's people, um,
Hmm.
loving God, loving our neighbor. And so, maybe we'll kind of get to some of that in a minute, but maybe if I could get you just to expound a little more on some of the ways that you've seen loneliness, this feeling of loss and grief, depression, anxiety. How have you seen that that's impacted people um, during this season?
Um, Let me think about how I could answer that. I think it's impacted them through, maybe like increased anxiety. Just maybe we normally wake up at a 3 with stress. And so as the day goes on, we move up to a 5. But right now, a lot of us are waking up at a 5 or a 6 because of all of this that's happening. And so then little things happen throughout the day, and we're at a 9 or a 10, and we're not used to being there.
Uh,
And so, that would be a way that I'm seeing that happening, is that we're just getting more stressed more quickly. It becomes really overwhelming. And then that tends to affect everything. I mean, it affects our relationships. I see that's what I'm seeing a lot of. It affects our marriages. It affects our relationships with our kids, our extended family. That gets complicated right now too, of trying to navigate that. Whereas some families maybe used to have some help from extended family, but to keep everybody safe, they're not having that anymore. And so that can be a stressor too. So I don't know. Does that answer your
that's,
question? You have to tell me if, yeah.
that's good. And I think hearing you describe it, like normally we wake up, if people normally wake up with stress levels at a 3, but just
Hmm.
to a pandemic, we're waking up with stress levels at a 5. So
Yeah.
every day we may move up 5 or 6 notches on that, that
Yeah.
spectrum. But
Yeah, even down to like having to remember to bring your mask everywhere you go. That's something you never had to do before, and it takes a little more energy.
right. Yeah. And like the process of getting out of the house, getting kids to school, getting to work, going to the grocery store.
Hmm.
I mean, everything there's another layer to that. And I think that's good to help kind of think about that. So I want to spend the majority of our time um, kind of thinking about self-care, and how do we kind of, again, think about this for the long haul. And so I know when we talked before, some of this will be kind of rehash for people, but I think it'll be important for people to be reminded of. We talked about some practices that we can use to, as we kind of live in times of uncertainty, of high stress, high anxiety. And so I'm curious, maybe just to get you to share a little bit about some of those, and then to talk a little bit just about why self-care is important. And maybe it'd be better to start there, I don't know, and then to talk about the practical thing.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
why don't you start by just kind of, why is something that, like, self-care,
Mhm.
something that we need to be pay attention to, and then we'll talk about the practical.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if we kind of going back to even using that idea of like a stress scale,
Mhm.
self-care can bring us down a notch. It can help us wake up a little less stressed. It can, if we're starting to move up in the day, we can move back down the ladder. It doesn't have to be big ways of caring for ourselves. I think, there are big ways we can care for ourselves, like, take yourself on a vacation or that kind of thing. But it doesn't have to be. I think some of the best self-care is things that don't cost any money and you don't have to go anywhere but maybe outside to do it. Because good self-care routines are things that you can really implement in your day. So we talked about spiritual practices. I would say those spiritual practices we talked about are ways of caring for yourself for sure. But I think, right now it is really important to do that because it replenishes you, it fills your cup up, to do things that kind of giving yourself some love would be maybe a way that I would describe it, and thinking about when we do that, that God loves us. And so he wants us to feel that love. Yeah.
That's good. Okay, so maybe why don't you share just practically like what that would look like? I mean, maybe you could
Mm-hmm.
speak to some of the things we talked about before, but I don't know if there's
Okay.
some other things you might think of as well.
Yeah. So about before were definitely things like going for a walk outside. We talked about doing deep breathing. That's a really good one that you can do multiple times a day.
Mhm.
Say, okay, I'm going to do this like a meal. I'm going to do it at breakfast time, lunchtime, and dinner time. I'm going to take a minute and just breathe and think about only my breath. We also talked about kind of that examine practice at the end of the day, thinking over your day and remembering, trying to find God's presence throughout your day and naming that and calling that out. You may have to help kind of jog my memory of some of the other
I think those,
practices that we talked about.
yeah,
Say that again.
that's what those are the big ones that I remember as well. And just for those of you who may not remember, I'll try to find the link to the previous conversation and drop it in the comments. But just a lot of those are pretty self-explanatory. The examine practice that Erin mentioned is just at the end of your day, kind of sitting to reflect on ways that you saw God at work, highlights of your day. You can do this with, if you have other people in your house, you can do this with other people in your house by just kind of going around the table and sharing, something, a high moment and a low moment from the day. And that practice helps you be reflective and also to be able to see ways that God was present in the course of your day. And so, like Erin said, there's no cost to that. It just requires us to not for our default thing to be like to turn on the TV or to pick up our
Right.
phone,
Right.
but instead kind of be attentive to our own heart and mind and spirit at the end of the day. I don't know if you want to add anything
Yeah.
to that explanation, Erin, but
Yeah, I'm glad that reminded me of thinking about, turning the phone off and turning the TV off. A practice that I actually have just recently really been trying to start doing that I just happened upon myself is when I'm in the car, I'll notice that, I've always the radio on or a podcast on, and then I think, okay, this is a time that I am alone with God. And there's no noise, right? Like I'm not hearing the news. I'm not hearing about anything else in the world. So this is a great time to discipline myself, to turn everything off and just be quiet and think about, I'm just riding in the car, just me and God, and that actually feels pretty good. And then if you want to take that a step further, that's a great time to pray out loud and just talk out loud and have a conversation with God if you're comfortable with that. I know it feels kind of like weird when you first do that all alone, but then it's comforting after a while too. But so that could be a good practice that you can just put into your daily routine that you already have if you're in the car.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes.
So one of the, I think about, I mentioned a few weeks ago in some teaching that I did, I think there's really no, like, so a lot of times we like kind of very black and white practical examples. I think the thing I would encourage people with is to just like not feel like there's got to be a lot of rules with some of this. I think incorporating scripture, moments of silence, like Erin was talking about. One that I do often, and I know I've used as an example before, so this will be, a repeat for a lot of people who maybe have heard me talk about it. But I think sitting outside and looking at birds is a really, really practical thing. About, Jesus's words in Matthew 6 about the bird, look at the birds of the air, they do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And, one of the things that I've said before, Erin, is that, like, I feel like nothing about our circumstance will very likely will change after sitting in that space quietly for a few minutes, maybe reflecting on creation, thinking about watching birds. But it's fascinating to think about, where did that bird come from, and where is it going, and what did it eat this morning? And that God knows all of that, and that God cares about me more than he cares about that bird, and that we are more valuable to God than even this important creation of an animal, So, again, no cost to that, but there is a slowing down process that happens to help kind of center us a little bit more, and remember, help us remember that God's at work. I think even when we don't see that. So
it reminds us that we are not alone, and in that, especially in that practice, then you even physically see the things that remind you that we're not alone. I think that's exactly right. What you're saying is that doesn't like necessarily make the problems go away, but they don't seem as big anymore when you feel like you're not in them alone. Yeah. And so, it takes, I think it's like 6 times more glucose, so energy, to self-soothe than it does to co-regulate, to bring somebody else in on what you're going through and to not be alone in it. And so that's exactly why those types of practices are so helpful, because you're connecting with God and you're remembering, I'm not here alone. There's somebody else here with me. It takes a lot less energy to do that than to just try to handle it all on your own. And
interesting.
Yeah.
So it actually takes less physical, like, energy, you're saying. Say that again. I think
it takes 6 times more glucose to self-soothe, like calm yourself down, than it does to co-regulate, meaning bringing in someone else to connect with, to help regulate yourself. So bringing God in, bringing in somebody that you love, always less energy than to say, I'm just going to do this on my own. I've got it covered.
Wow. I think that's a powerful application for, what we're talking about too, because, I felt, I don't know your thoughts about this, but I have felt like, for anybody that kind of grew up in church, there's there's a biblical and confession, and a churchy word, confession, that we talk about. And, but a lot of times when people think about confession, they think about someone, sharing some big public sin or something like that. And I have held the belief for years that we really need to reclaim and redefine what we mean by when we say the word confession, because when I hear you describing this idea of co-regulating, is that how you said it? Like, I feel like that part of what confession really is getting the stuff that's in us out of us. And that in and of itself is the practice of confession. I've said before, I think, we think we're trash compactors, but we're really not trash. We think if we just keep burying it, that it'll just go away. When in reality, we are not. We're human beings, and we have to get that stuff out of us and not just keep burying it. So.
Yeah. There's a therapist, Kenny Sandifer. He says, when we want to push that down, it's like pushing a beach ball underwater. Like, you can't do that. It's going to come back up, and it's going to come back up with some force.
Yeah.
So it's much better to pass it off, to share it.
Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah.
I hope that that's helpful for some that are listening. So, um,
Mm.
I don't know. Are there other things that you think about, as we adjust to kind of the normal that you might add
Yeah.
here?
Yeah, I think something I thought about, I think this is on topic, but I think of this as self-care, and this is something very practical, but that we often forget. A really good way to care for yourself right now during this time is to do everything you can do to prioritize good sleep.
Hmm.
I mean, that is kind of the foundation of everything that our body needs to do. And so, if that's the one thing that you can control and um, be disciplined at right now, you know, a
Yeah.
lot has changed, but one thing that hasn't changed is the sun still goes down and then it comes back up. And those are the hours that we need to be asleep in.
Wow.
So, that is a really good time to rejuvenate. So I think that's something people forget, but maybe it would be good to think about, hey, have I slept the same lately? Or am I staying up later? Or am I, even things like, am I drinking caffeine closer to bedtime more than I used to? Or, that's a good way to care for yourself because then you can wake up refreshed.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I think it's, like you said, there's a lot you can't control, but that is a rhythm that is going to happen every day, no
Yeah,
matter what. And
right.
and I think it
Yeah.
plays into what we were talking about Matthew 6 too. I mean, the sun's going to come up tomorrow, and
Mm-hmm.
can't add any hours to our day by worrying about whatever's ahead of us. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
kind of
And
let
I would say I may add a layer as we talk about or even thinking about discipline, spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices is probably a better word, but and
we
self-care.
can kind of segue into that. This is a good time to do that. I think. If you,
Okay. I'm thinking about sometimes it can be hard to think about in the midst of a really stressful time. Oh, I got to add all these new routines and then I'll be okay. And so it can be helpful to kind of just give yourself permission to be where you're at and be helpful to go, okay, what's the best I can do right now? I may not be able to add in 5 new things that I'm going to be able to do every day, but what's one thing I could do where I could feel God's presence for those moments today, where I could feel love during those moments, I can be reminded I'm not alone. And then that give yourself permission for that to be enough to do one thing. So not to overwhelm ourselves with more,
yeah,
if that makes sense.
it does. That's good. And it's that's I think that connects to part of what I mentioned earlier. Like, there's not a lot of I don't want this to feel like we're giving people some extra set of rules to follow or whatever.
Yeah,
It's just
exactly.
uh, kind of incorporating things naturally into the life that we're already living, and being aware
Mm-hmm.
of where we can let things fall, we can let things drop, and um,
Mm-hmm.
the practices that we add should be life-giving and not draining or out of,
Yeah.
you know. So,
Yeah. Okay. I just thought of this metaphor when you said letting things fall. I didn't make this up. Someone told it to me.
okay.
But thinking about how, like, we're always juggling balls. We juggle rubber balls and glass balls. And we need to identify what are the rubber balls that we can drop and then we can go pick them up when we need to. But what are the glass balls? What are the things that if we drop that, they're going to shatter? And we don't want that to happen. And so now's a good time to reassess, is that actually a rubber ball? And maybe I just need to let that drop. And 6 months from now, I'm going to go pick it back up. But then identifying there's a few core things here, like my relationship with the Lord, my relationship with my family. Those are glass balls, and we don't want to drop those right now.
That's really, really good image. I think
Yeah.
that's helpful. And I've had some things, and I'm sure you have and others have too, that during this season, you know, I have not had the bandwidth to continue doing some of those things. And I've had to,
Yeah.
I don't know where this would fit in the rubber ball, glass ball illustration, but there's also some things that I've just decided, like, in another year, could do that, but I can't do it in
Yeah.
2020, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I've had to stop doing it, or, remove my, if I was committed to something, I'd have to kind of back out of it or whatever. I've had a number of those things
Yeah.
personally that I couldn't, I have decided that I can't do,
Yeah.
time. So
Yeah, we just have to acknowledge we have limits.
Yeah.
And right now we're much closer to our limits than we normally are. And so we just give ourselves permission to let some things fall. And it may not feel good to do that. I think that's always to be expected, that when we drop any ball, it doesn't feel real great, but it doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do for us.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this is helpful. This is really helpful for me. And we've covered most of what I wanted to talk about. I don't know if you have other things you think about wanting to add here, but my hope has just been, I want to give people some hope as we think about kind of another word about that, but just, people know that they can. I want people to know that we can do this. We're going to do it together. I think having community, having a group of people that you're walking with in this season, kind of one of my theme verses throughout this whole thing is actually kind of an obscure Old Testament verse in 2 Chronicles 20 that I know I'm taking out of context, but it's appropriate. The story of Jehoshaphat, and there are enemies around him on every side, and he has this prayer that he prays in 2 Chronicles 20, and at the end of this prayer, he says, "For we have no power to face this vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." And and I feel like 2 Chronicles 20 verse 12, and I feel like I have felt that way a lot in this season. Like I'm holding on to Jesus. I'm holding on to the community of faith that I have, and I think there are lots of days where I don't know what to do, but just try to be faithful and loving God, loving others. So I don't know if you have it. I'll give you the last word if you have something to maybe to add to that.
Yeah, I thought in reaction even to what you're saying in that verse, I thought about, this is such an invitation this time to what other time in our lives have we been given this big of an invitation to keep our eyes on Jesus while so much is changing. And so that's a pretty big invitation.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I thought of, just thinking about offering some hope, is in this like no end in sight kind of feeling, is remembering that we are always changing all the time. Everything is changing all the time, even when we're not in a pandemic. Nothing ever stays the same. And so we often will hear like, oh, things don't change, but they do if we really think about it. I mean, even if you take a moment and if you feel anxious and like find anxiety in your chest and just focus on it, you can feel it moving. So nothing stays the same. Everything keeps moving. And so things will change. They won't stay exactly the way they are right now. And I hope that brings some hope to just remember that. There will be changes and they'll keep happening, and it will get better.
Yeah, that's good. And that if someone today needs to hear that you're not alone and that there is help, there's people's resources, communities, lots of people out there. And so I know Erin and I both are willing to help connect you with some of those.
Absolutely.
I hope that this has been meaningful to those of you who watch. And Erin, I can't thank you enough, both for you and Jason and y'all's friendships that we have, but also just for you sharing some of your wisdom and expertise with people today. And I know that it's going to be. I have a page full of notes that I've written here. I've taken notes, and I hope that it's also been a blessing to others who will watch. So
I hope so too. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks all of you who are watching. The Lord bless you and keep you. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Erin, I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
All right.
Okay. Bye.